all just another desperate attempt to concentrate power in the hands of a few cis, straight, white men.
Another day, another TikTok meltdown that actually makes no sense. We're going to break this down, plus so much more, on today's episode of the Barad vs. Everyone podcast, my daily show, where we take on the craziest ideas from across social media and the internet, all from an independent political perspective. Up first, we're going to talk about the online meltdown over a preliminary Supreme Court ruling that was handed out that concerns transgender rights, non-binary rights, and a Trump policy that would have, and now will, prohibit people from getting an X on their passport because they feel non-binary, listed as their sex, and will also require people's sex, biological sex, to be listed rather than how they identify or feel. The Supreme Court hasn't issued a final ruling on this, but they did allow the Trump administration's policy to go into effect until they decide a further ruling. Here is Fox News summing up some details of the case.
6-3 decision, the court found that displaying a passport holder's sex at birth no more violates equal protection to displaying a person's country of birth. It continues that in both cases, the government is merely attesting to a historical fact without subjecting anyone to differential treatment. The decision undoes a lower court's order that stopped the Trump administration from removing the X option from passports. This now also allows the requirement of listing biological sex to be enforced. The X option on passports was the product of the Biden administration. The White House maintains that that brought unseriousness to government documents meant to accurately identify people. Attorney General Bondi celebrated the emergency relief granted to the government, writing, "In other words, there are two sexes, and our attorneys will continue fighting for that simple truth." The fight is not over, though, because this is not a final ruling. It simply allows the new passport policy to continue while the cases play out in lower courts.
So to me, this is just common sense. There are only two sexes, and your biological sex is not subject to self-identity. I find it laughable that the X was ever an option, as if that makes any sense. No human's sex is X, and the entire non-binary thing is ridiculous. So the fact that the Biden administration actually made that as an option was always crazy. So I support the Trump administration's policy doing away with that because it's nonsensical and it fundamentally denies reality. However, the legal argument against this Trump policy is that by requiring people to list their sex on their passports rather than their self-identified identity, the government is somehow violating equal protection. It is discriminating against people, but it's really not, because it's asking everyone to list their sex the same. And if that doesn't discriminate against you, if your sex being listed upsets you, that's not the same thing as being discriminated against. They're arguing that it violates the equal protection clause of the Constitution to list a fact, which I don't understand how that is even an argument or possible, because this is, I mean, you are free to live however you want and identify yourself how you please, but your biological sex is a fact and you can't choose it or change it. And to list it the same way listing your height or your race, nobody would ever say it violates the equal protection clause of the Constitution that I can't list myself as 6'5" when I'm only 6'3", or if a guy was shorter and he really wanted to feel taller. It's a listing a fact can't be a hate crime. I don't know how much further to explain this, but as you can imagine, over on TikTok, the response to this ruling from the Supreme Court is very measured and nuanced. Just kidding. They're losing their ever-loving minds. And we are going to go into it, and I'll show you some of the crazier videos after this. When it comes to the debate over LGBT issues, Americans increasingly live in different realities, and our media outlets do too. Just consider the story we talked about recently with the Trump administration seeking to uphold and bring to the Supreme Court its policy requiring sex at birth, biological sex, to be listed on passports, getting rid of the Biden administration's policies to let you put a non-binary gender marker on your passport, an X, and all that. Well, if you only read partisan media, left or right, you'd struggle to understand the full picture of what's truly happening beginning with this story. Using Ground News, an amazing service I've used for years and used to help prepare this show, you can figure out what's really going on. It shows you what both sides are saying so you can make up your own mind, and it includes important information about a source's bias, factuality, ownership, and more. Back to this story about the Supreme Court and the passport changes. On the left, the Advocate's headline reads, "Trump admin asks Supreme Court to restore anti-trans passport policy." Meanwhile, on the right, the National Pulse covered the story as Trump seeks Supreme Court intervention on woke passport gender ruling. That's quite the difference. I knew the media was bad, but using Ground News to help bring you this show has really helped me see just how bad things have gotten. You can get the same plan that I use, which is the Vantage subscription, at the link in the description and on screen, ground.news/Brad. Also, the QR code is there on screen, and you can get up to 40% off the Vantage plan. This exclusive discount is available now through my link, so go ahead and break your bubble and sharpen your critical thinking skills by signing up right now. You'll be glad you did. All right, guys, without further ado, let's take a look at the first video we have of a TikTok lawyer, allegedly on the lawyer part, losing her mind over this ruling. Let's listen to her and see. Maybe she makes some points. I don't know. Let's listen.
When I say this, I mean it with my whole heart. The Supreme Court. 6 justices just greenlit a policy that forces trans and non-binary Americans to list the sex on their birth certificate, on their passport, even if it outs them, endangers them, or contradicts who they are. It's so f***ed up. It's not about accuracy. It's not about security. It's about forcing people back into the closet and punishing them for existing. Every person deserves dignity. Every person deserves safety. And every person deserves identification that reflects who they are, not who extremists want them to be. So we fight this. We protect our trans community. We show up because this policy is built on cruelty, and cruelty is a choice.
There's a lot to unpack there from our friend. I don't think it's cruel to list a fact. And I think that biological sex is a meaningful dimension of human existence that's enshrined into our laws and into our ways of life in many profound and important ways. And accurately listing it on government documentation isn't a hate crime. And I'm sorry, of course, everyone deserves dignity and safety. And I want all trans people, even people who identify as non-binary, while I don't think that's real, of course I want them to be safe and I want them to be treated with respect. But you are not legally or morally entitled to list inaccurate information on government documentation. If you put your sex under this Biden policy that's being overturned, if you put your sex as X for non-binary, that is a literally false statement. It's not true. So in these cases, they're arguing they have a legal right to put false information on their documentation. That's not a thing. That can't possibly be a thing in any coherent system or structure. And then the idea that like, oh, this is cruel, this puts people in danger. I really don't agree with that or understand that, because fundamentally, you are going to be treated the same way as anyone else when you are traveling across country lines or what have you, so long as you're not going into a country where being trans is like illegal or dangerous or something like that, because then that would be very unwise. But the question is, why are you going to those countries in the first place? As a transgender person, you should not be going to a country where you will be unsafe if it is known that you are transgender. And if you do, I would advise against that strongly. I mean, I don't go to countries where it's illegal to be gay. I never would. And if you do, you are taking a degree of risk upon yourself. And I don't think that your wish to do so entitles you to false government documents. Like, the government doesn't have to help you go stealth in a foreign country. There's not a constitutional right to that. That's a bizarre claim to even argue. And I just don't think that listing biological reality can be considered cruel. This woman talks about that you have a right to identification that reflects how you feel. You really don't. You have a right to identification that is accurate and correct. If you feel 6'5", or if I felt African American. I don't have a right to have either of those things listed on my driver's license because those are not correct. They're not true. They're not real. And I've never really had any problem with trans people living how they want to live and walking the world as the other gender for many intents and purposes, but their sex still exists, and their sex is still the same as it was when they were born. Biological sex is immutable. It's defined by the structure of your reproductive system. And to the extent they are listing that it's listing sex, a fact is a fact, and a fact cannot be a hate crime, people. I really don't understand this pushback, and I think it's all a bit ridiculous. But guys, we have another video, this time from an actual non-binary identifying individual on TikTok, explaining why this is such an outrage that I want to tackle with you all. But first, do make sure you're subscribed, do hit the like button, comment with your thoughts as we go along. Remember to send in your voicemails for our Voicemail Friday episodes, where I react to your woke horror stories, give you advice on your personal lives, and answer questions that you guys have for me. The link to send in one of those is, as always, in the description. Now, guys, let's look at this second video, this time from a user who identifies as non-binary, explaining why they object to this policy and this ruling. Let's listen.
You think if I walk up to you at the airport and show you an F on my passport, you're gonna let me get on that flight? Like, you're not.
Yes, I think they will. So this person is saying because she, I guess, because this person is female, they just told us, is female but presents in a more masculine fashion, that if they go up to security or to the like TSA checkpoints or what have you, or the passport offices and customs, and they have an F on their documentation, you're not going to allow me on the plane. I think they will, actually. I think there will be briefings and instructions that go out instructing people to not necessarily hold up. And if the image matches, I don't see why they wouldn't. And on the contrary, what this argument and these side, because what they're arguing is that, well, there's a discrepancy between my visual appearance and what's listed on my documentation, and that could cause problems when I'm traveling, and it could confuse security officers and all that. And I don't actually deny that. I think there could be issues, but there's also issues with the Biden policy. When you're going to walk up, and plenty of people will label, did and have labeled changed their labels or identification to their gender identity, but still look like their birth sex. And they have an issue and they have a mismatch. And so either way, there's going to be some confusion or some difficulty. So that alone, it doesn't win you this argument, I guess. And especially once you hear a little more from this person, you'll see why.
You're not. When I first started transitioning, I remember going into a bar with my ID and having someone tell me that it wasn't me because it was a woman's ID. Ever since that happened, I was nervous to go to the airport, I was nervous to travel, I was nervous to do anything because my ID had an F on it. So I felt immediate relief when I got an X on my license, finally. The Supreme...
Hold up. I don't know if y'all caught that. So this person told us I can't go up to a counter and show them an ID that has an F on it because I look more masculine. They'll be confused. They'll think it's not me. They'll think it's not correct. But I can go up with my sex listed as X, and that won't confuse anyone. Am I going insane? That is way more confusing to 99% of people. I know you're on TikTok, so maybe you're in that echo chamber life, but to 99% of people, that is way more confusing than the idea that you are biologically female but present yourself as a man in many intents and purposes. Yeah, that's a lot more confusing and incoherent, and probably going to cause more problems traveling to foreign countries. Make it make sense. Challenge level 1000 impossible.
Supreme Court just ruled to resume Trump's plan and requires people's sex assigned at birth to be displayed on their identity documents. Not only is this going to take me back to the place of fear and anxiety that I was in 5 years ago, it's undoing a 33-year-old policy that allows people to have accurate gender and sex designations. How? Out of everything that's happening in the world right now, is this an emergency in the Supreme Court?
So the 33-year-old policy, the X thing, has only been around since Biden's presidency. And what the person is referring to is that trans people, I guess, have been able to change their passports for a very long time. And maybe that wasn't such a big deal when you only had a tiny number of people with genuine gender dysphoria trying to change it. But then the self-ID and the wave of radical trans activism have made it an issue. So I think it does need to be changed, and stricter definitions and guidelines do have to be enforced. And I'm sorry for the genuine anxiety or stress that might cause some actual trans people, but yeah, it's not cruel to list a fact. I don't know. I have some sympathy and compassion for these people. You can tell their emotion about this is real, but also at the end of the day, it's just a piece of paper, and you should feel good about yourself and strong in who you are, regardless of what that piece of paper says. And if you can't accept the fact that you're biologically female, that's something you should work on, because you are, and that's never going to change. You can be trans, you can walk the world in a different way. I will happily engage in some social fiction to that extent, if that will help you live a happy and successful life. But at the end of the day, you have to accept reality. And say the 33-year-old policy of having accurate documentation, it's actually a 33-year-old policy of having inaccurate documentation in some cases. And I don't think government documents should be inaccurate. Sorry, I just don't.
This is an organized effort to humiliate and endanger trans, non-binary, and intersex Americans. And I just wish everyone could see how it's all just another desperate attempt to concentrate power in the hands of a few cis, straight, white men.
I'm trying really hard to retain sympathy for this person, but once you start babbling about cis white men, I roll my eyes so hard I get myself a headache. And I'm sorry, but it is not an effort to humiliate or endanger people to simply list biology. It's just not. And y'all sound hysterical and delusional. That's my take on it all, but you guys will have to let me know what you think in the comments below. Make sure you're subscribed if you aren't yet. Hit the like button and all of that.